The people that you think of as your political enemies are probably a lot closer to you ideologically than you think they are. And if they're not, it's probably not for the reasons you think. Hi, I'm Judah. You might not know who I am, or you might know me as a TikToker, clown, himbo on the internet, but I am in fact a political scientist. I'm a PhD student in political science. I have a master's in political science. I have a master's in legal theory, and I have a law degree. Most of my life for the past decade that has not been on the internet has been academic research in politics and constitutional law. And at this point in my life and in our collective lives, I have decided to merge those things, and this is a part of that. So anyway, yesterday I made a video about political alignment, about the meaning of terms like left and right, authoritarian, libertarian, that sort of thing. I explained that it's not just a line left to right. You can think of it metaphorically as more of an X and Y axis, where the X is economic and the Y is social. If you want a more in-depth explanation of that, you can go back to the video that I posted yesterday. But ultimately, you end up with a picture that's sort of like this. It's just sort of a visual representation of where we can plot people in terms of their beliefs about individualism versus collectivism and the role of the state, etc. So being left or right on the horizontal scale does not fully answer the question. There are a lot more moving parts than that. And this particular visual representation comes from the Political Compass. I'll put the link in the description. If you want to go there yourself and mess around with it, you can answer a bunch of questions. It'll show you where you fall on this graph, where certain politicians fall on this graph, certain regimes. But as I said in that video yesterday, this is not the full picture. It's a heuristic. It's sort of a shortcut rule of thumb way of thinking about where people fall politically very roughly. But this video is going to be mostly about where Americans tend to see themselves on this political board, and where the parties want Americans to see themselves on this board, and how that definitely is not where they are. Left to right axis largely measures a certain set of economic views, the degree to which you think that we should be involved in supervising market economies and protecting citizens from their worst effects, from their wealth stratification, from their volatility, or if you think that market economies should just be allowed to set their own rules based on their internal forces. How many limits should be put in place, if any at all? So the further right you are, the less you want certain kinds of regulation, the less you think it's a problem for economies to create large distances between the wealthy and the poor, the less you think that we should be involved in any way in creating less inequality. There is broad consensus now across the political spectrum, however, that you cannot just have a completely free market economy without any kind of regulation or intervention, because you cannot count on the market to correct itself. Without any kind of guardrails, you just get extreme volatility, extreme wealth stratification, and extreme unpredictability. It turns out you really just cannot count on the forces generated by self-interested, profit-seeking behavior to correct the problems that are generated by collective action in a large-scale economy. The Great Depression taught us that lesson in a really big way. We had to learn how to incentivize certain behaviors, how to curb certain bad behaviors to stop the economy from just driving itself off of a cliff. We learned that lesson again in '08. Then the further left you go on this axis, the less you tend to trust market forces to correct themselves, the less you tend to trust market economies to regulate themselves, the less you tend to trust large economic actors to behave in ways that generate collective good. Farther left you go, the more economic supervision you might think is necessary in order for more people to live flourishing lives. But even at the farthest collectivist left end, you still find market economies. You don't get rid of the market. That is not something that anybody has ever thought to be feasible. It's hard to imagine what that would even look like. The most extreme historical examples that are brought out are those of Soviet Russian communism, for instance. There you had a much more centralized planned economy, one that was still driven by markets but was highly supervised by the state. People like to trot that out as like a warning against left politics, like, look how badly communism went. But between you and me, Marx never intended for the Russians to adopt his prescriptions. He was writing for a much larger, more technologically advanced economy than the agrarian society that the Russians had at that point in history. So it's a really terrible example to try to use to defeat the prescriptions of Marxism or leftism, because it wasn't really Marxism. Marxist socialism, Marxist communism has never actually been tried anywhere because nowhere that has allegedly tried it has met his conditions. Anyway, I've been saying all of this as a very roundabout way to talk about the United States of America. Because though there seems to be extreme amounts of vitriol between the we have two parties, but two political parties in America. And though there appears to be no way to bridge the vastly different worldviews between these parties, their disagreements are actually happening at a very small scale. Those two parties are actually very, very close to each other on the economic axis. Democrats pushing for things like raising the minimum wage, which, by the way, minimum wage itself is an intervention into the economy. It is a left-leaning proposal. A hard-right person would not even believe in the need for a minimum wage because the economy would figure it out with its internal forces what the minimum wage ought to be. And pushing for some progressive taxation of the rich, but at levels that are not even close to what it has been historically within our own country. And universal health care. And that is a basic intervention into the economy that most other countries have that we do not have. But when it comes down to it, the average leftism of the Democrats is still very much right of center. It is not going anywhere even close to the direction of centralized planning of the economy or redistribution. The farthest left Democrat in the American Congress would still be considered center, if not right of center, according to most metrics of political alignment. So then where are the disagreements really happening? Where is all the vitriol coming from? Where do people get the perception that two partisans from these two parties are so wildly apart from each other on the political spectrum? It's because the focus has been strategically shifted to the social axis. Because as long as disagreements appear to be very large along that axis, we don't have to focus on shifting the center of our economic view. It means we don't have to discuss questions that would risk disturbing the extremely privileged position of the richest Americans. It's not even clear that the disagreements directly line up with whether each of these parties is more authoritarian or libertarian when it comes to social issues either. The answer changes depending on the particular question. But as long as we're at each other's throats about abortion, gay marriage, and genderless bathrooms and not discussing our attitudes about the wealthy, then the wealthiest political donors win no matter who wins.